the blood of Jesus.
Welcome to A Biblical Worldview. I'm your girl, Tanya Michelle, and thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Don't forget that you can follow me on all my socials. They're listed in the description box. And leave a like underneath the video so that I can get into the algorithm. Just hit that thumbs up button. Won't cost you a thing. And that will put me into your feed when you log on to your Rumble or your YouTube account. Leave some comments on the video. I read the comments and I will respond to you if you like. And share the video with your friends. If you find any encouragement in any of my videos, I hope that you will share them with your friends so that they can be encouraged too. Also, if you'd like to contribute to my efforts here at Biblical Worldview, there are some links in the description box underneath the video where you can donate. Any contribution will help me continue to bring you content from a biblical perspective. So let's get into it. Well, we are continuing our journey through the book of Genesis, and today we've landed in Genesis chapter 42, and we're going to just dig into just a few verses today, starting with verse 24 and going down to verse 28. I'm reading from the Legacy Standard Bible, which is my normal practice. And so I just want to read Genesis chapter 42, verses 24 through 48. If you'd like to follow along with me, the word of God says this. And he turned away from them and wept. Then he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. And Joseph gave a command to fill their bags with grain and to restore every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and went from there. Then one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place. And he saw his money, and behold, it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack. And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? So Joseph was listening to his brothers express the guilt which they were feeling because of what they had done to him many years earlier. In my last video, we talked about that guilt and that guilty conscience that they were dealing with because of what they had done to him. It touched his heart, though, so much so that it brought tears to his eyes. You know, Joseph was a kind-hearted person, I do believe, way deep down. He loved God, and God had been with him all this time. He knew God was with him because it made no sense that he had been promoted into the places where he had been promoted without God having done it. There's no way it would have happened. And we know that anyone who truly loves God has a heart that is compassionate towards others. Joseph was compassionate towards his brothers, even though they had done some horrible things to him in the past. They hated him when they were growing up. They had taken him from his family and they sold him into slavery. But the brothers were now living with the regret that came from their actions, and Joseph's heart was burdened for them at that moment. And so Joseph left them and he went so that he could go and cry privately. But he returned to them after he composed himself. He took Simeon as the brother who would remain while the others went back to retrieve the youngest brother. Now, scholars suggest that Simeon was chosen because he was the cruelest of all the brothers. It was Simeon and Levi, if you remember, back in Genesis, I want to think, Genesis maybe 34 maybe? I'm not sure. But Simeon and Levi were the ones who concocted the plan to kill all the men of the land of Shechem when King Hamor's son, who was also named Shechem, violated their sister Dinah. It was Simeon who appeared to be Joseph's most bitter enemy back in the day, because it was he who said, "Here comes that dreamer. You remember when Jacob sent Joseph to go look for the brothers, and Joseph finally found them. He went to where he thought they were. He thought they were in Shechem, and somebody told him no. They went to Dothan. So Joseph headed over to Dothan, and Simeon saw him coming in the distance. He said, "Here comes that dreamer." Simeon was also the one who suggested that they kill Joseph. So scholars suggest that Simeon may have been the least humbled and the least contrite about all of the stuff that the brothers had done to Joseph. And it stands to reason, as human beings, that maybe Joseph looked at Simeon a little differently from the other brothers because of the severity with which Simeon had handled him in the past. I mean, yes, he has compassion towards his brothers, and yes, he wants to be with them, but you got to remember that Joseph, they did some stuff to him, and he's been through some stuff because of what they did. And if Simeon was the ring leader, I can understand him kind of looking at Simeon side-eyed. Not that he has not forgiven him, but just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean you trust them. So, after Simeon's arrest, the other brothers were dismissed to return home. The buying price of the grain that they sought was returned to their sacks, unbeknownst to any of the brothers. Joseph had purposely not put their money in their hands. He had it put into their sacks. He reminds me of Jesus in that moment, because the Lord provides what we need even though we have no money that is nearly enough to pay for his provision. Matthew Henry said it like this, quote, "Thus Christ, our Joseph, gives out supplies without money and without price," unquote. God provides for us without our having to pay. And that's just a little example of it in this situation with Joseph and his brothers. But Isaiah 55:1 says, "Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost." There is no price that you nor I could pay for the grace of God. And by the way, when was the last time you heard a prosperity preacher preaching Isaiah 55:1? Have you ever heard any prosperity preacher say, "Come, those of you who have no money"? Last prosperity preacher I heard was telling people, "You better come down here. I know there are 10 of you all in this congregation who could give $10,000. There are 100 of you who could give at least $1,000, and I need $10,000 right now." You all probably saw the video, so you probably know who I'm talking about. And so you will not hear prosperity preachers preaching Isaiah chapter 55 verse 1, but that's just an aside. Anyway, so the brothers loaded their animals with grain, and they headed back home from Egypt. And one of them, the Bible doesn't say which brother it was, but one brother opened his sack to find something to give to his donkey to eat, because they had stopped and they were taking a little break, a little rest stop, and they were just going to feed the animals. And when he opened his sack, he found the money that he had paid for the grain in Egypt. So that brother, and like I said, we don't know which brother it was, that brother said to the rest of the brothers in verse 28, "My money has been returned. It is in my sack." I imagine his heart sank at that moment. They had already been confronted by this governor of agriculture about being spies. He had already accused them of spying out the land. They had been questioned about their family life. They had been instructed to bring their youngest brother back with them, while having left one of their brothers in Egypt in prison. These brothers had been through the mill, and now this. Their hearts sank. They may have stood for a moment staring at each other in disbelief. They were shocked. They were dumbfounded. They didn't know what to think. They didn't know what to do. At that moment, they did what we as human beings do sometimes. They began to think of who they could blame. We always want to put fault on somebody. And I mean, part of it I understand, because we always want to see justice. But sometimes things just happen. You can't even, there's not a blame. There's no one to blame. So their question was, what is this that God has done to us? Their guilty consciences came into play. And so they're thinking that this is their punishment from God for what they had done for their brother. Done to their brother, I'm sorry. They probably thought of how they had mistreated him, and they figured that this was God's way of paying them back. And you know, sometimes we think like that as human beings. But let me just say this: these little things that happen to us in life, and a lot of terrible things happen to us. And sometimes the enemy will try to trick us into believing that this is our punishment for our sin. But I don't believe that there's anything that happens to us in life that is bad enough to punish us for the sin. In other words, our sin deserves a way greater punishment than the Lord would give us here on this earth. Think about what Jesus endured for our sin. Think about after he was arrested and he was tried and then he was convicted. Think about the beating that he took. Think about the humiliation ritual that they took him through, where they put the robe around his shoulders, calling him the King of the Jews. Think about how they hit him and they pulled his beard out of his face. Think about how they spat on him. Oh my goodness. And every time I think about them spitting on Jesus, I just get mad. I just get mad all over again. But all of that, he endured all of that. And then, after having been beaten mercilessly, he had to carry his cross until his physical body could no longer carry that cross. And then once he got to the place where he was going to be hung, he was nailed to that cross. So see, these trials and these things that we go through, and sometimes they are a result of our own foolishness, our own foolish behavior or foolish decisions, but they are not anywhere near what our sin deserves. So when we are thinking that God is, quote unquote, getting back at us for something, that's just the enemy, because our sin debt is paid. Jesus paid it all. Jesus paid it all. When I say that, I think of the hymn, because that's my favorite hymn. Jesus paid it all. I love that hymn because it tells such a great truth. And so, Matthew Henry, in his commentary, says this, quote, "Guilty consciences are apt to take good providences in a bad sense, and to put wrong construction even upon those things that they make for them. They flee when none pursues." So this is what's happening to the brothers right now. Their guilty consciences are wearing them out. So instead of looking at the money being back in their sack as a blessing, and God is sovereign over everything, so he allowed this to happen, they thought it was something that had to be terribly wrong because that money was back in their sacks. The other thing that Matthew Henry points out about this verse is that wealth sometimes brings as much anguish as poverty. Think about it. These brothers have the money that they brought for the grain. So basically they haven't lost a thing, and they've gained the food that they need to feed their father and their families. Matthew Henry says this, quote, wealth sometimes brings as much care along with it as want does, and sometimes more. If they had been robbed of their money, they could not have been worse frightened than they were right now when they found their money in their sacks. Unquote. They feel as anxious about this situation as if they as anxious as they would have felt if they had not had the money to pay for the food when they got to Joseph. So this is what a guilty conscience is doing to these brothers. This is not funny, but it tickles me because, you know, they don't even understand. And I get it. That's just like, you know, me going to pay a bill. You know, I pay a bill online, and then I go back and the money that I spent to pay the bill is still in my account. What? Yeah. So I can kind of see their plight. One thing's for sure, these brothers are in an emotional turmoil right now, and we're going to see how this thing plays out, because I tell you what, they are going through the mill right now. They are going through the mill. Well, that's my time. Thank you so much for stopping by Biblical Worldview. Don't forget to leave me a like on the video, and I will see you next time.